Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in internet shitlords, and today I was going to try to do a review of the book From the Tideless Sea, but I haven't been able to finish it yet because it's just gigantic. It's a source book for Raiders of Riley, so look for that sometime, maybe next week or maybe later this week, actually, depending on how much I can get through it. And but anyways, I actually also realized that this last weekend had been Gencon, and I talked about it somewhat on Twitter. I hadn't really talked about it much here, and I think it merits talking about. But there wasn't like some kind of one huge scandal to bind them all in Gencon this year, but it was its usual panoply of crap, right? Like I've heard a lot of people tell me on Twitter, oh man, I wish I could go to Gen Con, or I wish I could go to Gen Con sometime, or I wish I could go to Gen Con again, right? And what I tell them is, look, the Gen Con you want to go to is Gen Con 2001, right? Like you want to go to like Gen Con in the early 2000s or the late 90s or whatever, right? Or maybe in the 70s or 80s for that matter, right? Not the Gen Con of 2023, right? The Gen Con 2023 is not, it's a fake skin show of that. It's not the same at all. And, the next things I'm going to talk about today are proof of that. So I've picked 4 things that were crappy about Gen Con. Not all of them, to be fair, are entirely about Gen Con. Some of them just happened connected to and during Gen Con. So let's start maybe with the one that is the least Gen Con-y per se, and then go down to the one that is the most. So the least Gen Con-y one of all is that this weekend you may have heard that there was a huge scandal, supposedly, because Wizards of the Coast had to admit that one of the books that they are, proceeding to come out with shortly, this book on giants, has AI art in it. And as you know, it's a very contentious issue because there's a bunch of monks that are really troubled about the printing press coming out and taking away all their jobs. Oh, there goes Meatball. And so, Meatball she heard about AI and she's always deeply interested in that topic. So she came rushing over here. So yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of artists that think that AI should be banned basically as a technology. It should be forbidden for all time, and then we should just give up on AI entirely, so that they can keep charging you $200 for shitty Tumblr art instead of the $5 that it might be worth. And okay, so they were obviously very pissed off. A bunch of people were pissed off at Wizards having AI art in one of their books. And Wizards came out and made the announcement that they had no idea that this particular artist, with whom they had worked before, had used AI to do his art, So they kind of passed the buck to the artist. And, in short, I don't know. I mean, okay, let's give the best possible argument to their defense. It's that it is very hard to tell the difference between bad AI art and bad art done by, an amateur kind of Tumblr writer, right? So like their best defense is ironically that Wizards does not hire on merit or ability. That's very clear, right? They hire on the basis of either nepotism or diversity quotas. So the people that they hired were hired because either they are friends of people who are already working at Wizards, which is like what happened with half of Radiant Citadel, right? Or they are hired because they fulfill a certain skin color or gender type or, sexuality. And that was the other half of Radiant Citadel right there. And with artists, they're doing the same thing. So the art quality goes down. And that's also got a corporate interest, of course, because it means they can charge these people a lot less, right? Like if you're trying to get, one of these like great fantasy artists to do work for you in 2023, you're going to be paying a considerable amount more money than if you get some nobody and you celebrate their diversity and then you pay them $50, right, to do some crappy Tumblr art, which is still 10 times what it's worth, right? So and AI, ironically, like I've always said that one of the most human features of AI, one of the things that gives me a little bit of assurance that if AI ever does like become truly sentient, that it'll still be a lot like us, is that it can't draw hands or legs, right, or feet, So yeah, the fact that it has the same exact problems that we do with figuring out how to draw these things is, I think, in some way endearing. But it's also makes it hard to tell if a bad piece of art is AI or just by somebody who's a mediocrity, right? Now, I'm going to give you the best argument for why this is bullshit, and they actually did know all along, which is that I looked this guy up, and he's been promoting for quite some time the use of AI in his work, right? Like he hasn't hidden it. It's not like because I think maybe most people thought, oh, this guy just thought he'd sneak a fast one past WotC. No, his social media feed is talking openly about his use of AI, right? For some time, he thinks it's an interesting new medium, right? Like he's into this stuff, right? So that tells me that I'm pretty sure they had to know, and he probably just charged them cheap, and they went for it, and now they have to pretend to be shocked, So that's the deal with the number 4, right? Number 3 on the list is that we'll go with another WotC story here. Is that at Gencon they announced that there's going to be a new product called the Book of Many Things, because of course, again, the people making D&D nowadays, they have no real ability to produce anything unique that is going to be worthwhile, right? You've seen their best shot at uniqueness, which is the Radiant Citadel, which was like a bad Planescape imitation with unnecessary socialism and way too many food-related adventures, right? So that's their best shot. So they got to take other stuff, and now they're going to do a book that is based on the Deck of Many Things, right? A long-standing magic item of Dungeons and Dragons. And this person called Mackenzie DeArmas, I believe "person" is the right term here because I'm pretty sure they are they them. I'm going to assume they are. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry for using the wrong pronouns, Mackenzie. Came out on social media and said, "Yes, that's right. The cat's out of the bag. I've created the first canon autistic character who was also the creator of the Deck of Many Things." Right. So like this has of course caused a very strong reaction. First of all, okay, great. Now there's the celebration of autism there, but. And then Mackenzie Armas, by the way, is the person who's only been writing. She's only been playing they have only been playing D&D for like a few years now. Like 5th edition was the current edition when they joined, and I mean, they were immediately hired though because of their feminist cred and they fit all the right demographics, and they did a number of social media posts talking about how horrible white people are. Right. So based on that, they are now D&D professionals. And this is pretty much everybody in WotC, right? I think it was Diversity in Dragons commented that, the Deck of Many Things, because I commented on my Twitter, and then Diversity in Dragons did a video about this and pointed out the Twitter comment I made where I said basically that this is stolen valor that they're doing, right? People like Mackenzie are trying to lay claim to something vastly more popular and present themselves as the real, geniuses behind it, right? While they erase people like Gary Gygax. And he said that's absolutely right, and then I think he pointed out, Mackenzie Armas couldn't hold up a candle to Gary Gygax, right? They don't have a tiny ounce of the immense creativity that the early creators of D&D had. And I would agree absolutely with Diversity in Dragons on that, but I would go further. Mackenzie DeArmas and all the rest of the people who are creating 5th edition products right now, not only could they, never mind Gary Gygax, right? They couldn't hold a candle to the people who created 5th edition, to less than 10 years ago, right? Those people, you like they are so the people that are there now are almost none of them have played any really significant part in the creation of fifth edition. And they are not competent enough that they could actually produce an edition, right? Like whatever they do is going to be pathetically inferior, which is why I think they're going to try to only change the political aspects largely of 5e with their 1D&D, because they literally couldn't do anything better, right? They couldn't do anything that would equal it. Just like almost everywhere now in like, especially in areas of tech, but also in other areas of entertainment and stuff, the people in charge now are laying claim to ownership over something that they themselves could not create and cannot maintain, right? Like just like how by the time that Elon Musk bought Twitter, the people that were there probably couldn't have made Twitter, right? And they weren't active being able to effectively maintain it, And it's the same thing with all of these woke groups that have taken over areas of media, right? Like this Mackenzie Arma is saying, no, my stand-in Wizards in D&D, this person, this character, this paladin who is autistic, this autistic paladin who is obviously me, right? Just projected into my Mary Sue character, is the true creator of the deck of many things, right? Alongside, like this is from this book, right? And apparently it's Mackenzie the Armis's, Mary Sue character, who I think is called Asteria, the paladin, who's accompanied alongside a good aligned Medusa, because that's one of their big points, right? That monstrosities and abominations and horrific aberrations of nature, they could be good or bad, right? Doesn't, how dare you judge vampires and Medusas, right? Like they're not actually, they could actually be important advocates for the poor, right? Or whatever, like whatever these idiots are thinking, right? And, you can bet that they're probably also lovers, right? Or, while we're at it, they created the deck of many things, It wasn't created in Greyhawk by somebody that, wasn't the character of Gary Gygax or something. No, it was created by them. This is like the same thing that they tried to do with Doctor Who, where, Doctor Who is an incredibly successful series for such a very long time, from William Hartnell way back in 1963, all the way to Peter Capaldi. And then the SJWs took over, right? Chris Chibnall, and they decided to have a woman doctor, which might have worked if it wasn't that every episode was about shoving, literally kicking propaganda down your throat, right? Political garbage and terribly written stories. And so as revenge against the people who were no longer watching them, they did an episode where they reveal, actually William Hartnell, the first Doctor, was not really Doctor Who, the first Doctor Who, right? The first Doctor was a black woman, right? And in fact, there were thousands of multicultural and multi-gendered people before William Hartnell. And actually the last bunch of Doctors, the ones you saw that were all evil white men, they're just, stealing the true legacy of Doctor Who, which is full of obese black women, right? That's the real Doctor Who, right? So they do this as an act of revenge, right? Against the fact that they are failures. They are human failures in every aspect of their lives, and that they know that nothing they create will be sustained, right? So that's what this is about. That's what they're doing with this thing. And of course it should be resoundingly mocked. So that's number 2. I'm making good time here, actually. I thought that we might even get this all done in a half hour. Number 3, the awards at Gencon, as usual, are complete garbage. So, the Diana Jones Award, they gave one to Coyote and Crow, which is an RPG. Like, these are supposed to be these are like supposed to be the greatest excellence in game design. And like there was a time when that and the Ennies were given to products that were actually good and that people actually played, right? That they were products that you knew. So Coyote and Crow, some of you might know it because I did a video about it back when it was still a Kickstarter. That Kickstarter ended up making a huge amount of money based entirely off people wanting to virtue signal that they'd supported this thing, because it's the Native American RPG, and its basic premise is super woke. It's this concept that obviously North America, the Native American tribes, would have created Native American Wakanda, if only all the white people had died by being hit by an asteroid, right, and therefore never have come to cause their reign of terror, bringing such things as sciences and rationality and an end to human sacrifices, right, that sort of stuff. So those evil things, right? So that is the premise of Coyote and Crow. It's Native American Wakanda, right? And more importantly, though, it's a game that nobody plays, right? Absolutely nobody. It was bought for people to show off. In fact, white people were told that they probably shouldn't be playing it. If they do play it, they have to be very careful about how they do it so that they're not racist, etc. It's better probably just to buy it, but not to play it, right? That's what they were openly told. The guy raised, the person behind Coyote and Crow, raised close to $1 million or something like that, or around that money, and then went bankrupt, right? Which tells you that there was hugely great ethics going on there, right? So this is a product that almost no human being has played. It gets the Diana Jones Award, right? Radiant Citadel not only got a Diana Jones Award, but also an Emmy, right? The worst D&D product ever made by Wizards of the Coast, right? Radiant Citadel is absolute garbage, right? It's a socialist utopia with it was written by a bunch of people who've never played D&D, never read D&D, or who have done so only once or twice. Many of them are professional vegan cookbook writers, which explains why there's so much food references in the product, because you write what you know, right? And that's all they know. They don't know anything about D&D. Right? And these were all the biggest boast of Radiant Citadel, and the reason why it won these awards was because it proudly could say that not a single white person was involved in creating it. And that was the point, right? The whole point was just a virtue signal. So all these people that are saying that, oh yeah, well, I still go to Gen Con, I just hang out with my friends and I have fun. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Or I go, I can understand someone like James Raggi. He goes to Gen Con to sell his books, right? And apparently he sells books at a profit. It gets more than what it costs him to be there. And his very presence probably makes a bunch of people pissed off. And so on all those points, James Raggi gets a pass. He gets to be there, right? But there are a bunch of other people that are, entertainers and influencers and designers in the hobby that go to Gen Con and then do Twitter posts about, where they're eating there and they're all talking about how wonderful Gen Con is, right? And when you're doing that, you're essentially, anybody who goes to Gen Con and does that sort of thing is politically suspect at this point. They are the enemy. They're the enemy of the hobby. They're people like, I'm not talking about regular guys, because there are probably a lot of regular people that come in there. One of the funniest things that happened was that somebody showed the opening clip, when they open the doors and people start streaming in, right? And you look there, I think Double D had this on his video, right? I saw it on Twitter. The first 5 minutes, people coming in, and they're all kind of plump white guys, right? Like 90% of them are fat white guys, right? And so this puts the lie to the fantasy that RPGs are this diverse product, and that actually the white men are leaving the hobby, right? And that now the hobby belongs to people like Mackenzie DeArmas. It doesn't. It's still, even at Gen Con, even at the wokest damn place in the world, it's still basically you've got these white plump normies, right, that are all coming in there just to roll some dice and play, right? And I'm sure that for a lot of them, they can shield themselves from seeing what happens at Gen Con, right? Even though Gen Con has had literally I forget if it's 160 or 260 different panel discussions that were all about woke topics. They're all about safety tools in gaming, diversity and inclusion in gaming, et cetera, right? Even though all of their guests of honor, the guests of honor used to be people who were truly excellent game designers, right? The last one that I think that I can remember that was a guest of honor of Gen Con was Mike Ponsmith, who is a great game designer, but they didn't give him that position because they didn't make him the guest of honor because he was a great game designer. They made him guest of honor because he has black skin, right? And that's horrible that they would do that instead of, they'll claim, oh no, it's a record. No, but I mean, it was obvious that what they wanted was to pick someone who wasn't white. And that was the main principle, even though he absolutely does deserve to be the guest of honor at Gen Con, right? And then after that, they just gave up and they started saying, no, screw this. So at one point, Anita Sarkeesian was the guest of honor. She's not a gamer. She doesn't play D&D. She doesn't do any of this stuff. She doesn't know anything, right? She's just this useless parasite on society. And yet there she was, guest of honor of Gencon for being a whiny feminist. Yeah. And now this time I was like looking at, there were like all these special guests. I don't know if there was a guest honor. I couldn't find it. But there were all these special guests that were like there to do these different conferences and panels and stuff. And it was like incredible because there wasn't one of them that I knew about in the hobby, right? Like they were all just unknowns. Most of them were bloggers. Some of them were academics. Quite a few of them were journalists, right? None of them were straight white males, right? Like all these dozens of people, not one of them was a straight white male that I found. And none of them had any relation to anything popular at all, right? But regular gamers might still be coming in there and doing their thing and whatever. They're happy, okay? They probably have like this built-in normie barrier where they're ignoring, like they walk right past, they don't even see the diversity panel, and they just walk right into the room where they're going to be playing Warhammer or whatever, right? Like that's how it works for them. But if you're one of these designers or one of these influencers or one of these, YouTubers or whatever else we want to call it, you know what's going on, right? James Raggy knows what's going on. He's there to like, screw at the culture, right? And so do the people who sit around at the table and cheer of how wonderful Gencon is, right? So if they're cheering how wonderful Gencon is, they're cheering how wonderful this leftist totalitarianism is that has also deconstructed the hobby and is intentionally sabotaging it, right? So those people are politically suspect. You have to assume that they're on the side of the enemy there. You should keep that in mind. And as my final point, the last of the four things that were worst about Gencon this year, my number one is the Latine Lounge, right? The totalitarian white left, having given up on trying to force Latinos to accept the term Latinx, have now moved on to suggest that we use the term Latine, that is to say Latin with an E at the end, as again, to try to force a non-gendered version of the Spanish language, because they are trying to impose on us this idea that, words aren't allowed to have gender because that's rape culture or something. So they have created the Latine Lounge, just like in the year before. I think they instituted, I don't know if it was repeated again this year. I would assume so, because they never want to take a step back with this stuff, right? So I think it was last year, they started having an area that is basically an area for people of colors, off limits to white people, right? But it's more specifically an area for black people. And there are some black people that go to Gencon, but it's going to be based on what we saw in the video, it's not that many. But there are going to be enough that they could fill a room, I'm sure. And so that became like the black people room, right? But it's not really the black people. It's just the black communists room, right? Like that's not, no normal gamer who happens to be black would want to be there, because it's going to be a room that's going to be all about, talking about critical race theory or whatever. But it's a room where you're explicitly not welcome if you're not a person of color, right? And now this year, they've done the same kind of thing with the Latine Lounge. It's supposed to be for like Latinx gamers, right? Which again, no self-respect Latino. Remember, 96% of Latinos are violently opposed to these non-gendered terms like Latinx or Latine, right? But they keep insisting on trying to impose it on us. Why? Because they get a little bit of covering fire from a couple of like third-generation Latinos that speak Spanish worse than AOC does, and who, think that being Latino means being communist, and that's it, and not even like actual Latino communists, just white left communism, because the communism of a North American, of some North American that went to Columbia or whatever, is not, or to Berkeley or whatever, let's say, is not the same as the communism of Venezuela or Cuba, right? Like they wouldn't put up with that bullshit there either. Say what you will about Latin American communists, which are all pretty crappy, but yeah, this is woke communism, which is even worse. So the Latine Lounge, I don't know exactly what's in it, but I can imagine, and so could you. You can guess, and it's going to all be some. Again, no self-respecting Latino would want to be inside it, but they created it in order to satisfy the demands of mostly white women, I'm guessing, female white ultra progressives, right, ultra leftists, who are demanding these things on the behalf of poor Latinos like myself, who don't know what's best for them and need to be guided by these white women. And that this is like a really positive thing, and that it's a safe space. Because, of course, if you're Latino and you go anywhere else in Gen Con, you're going to be violently assaulted by Klansmen or something. The only people that get assaulted at Gen Con are conservative gamers, actually. Jeremy Hambley was assaulted at Gen Con. I don't know anybody else who gets assaulted at Gen Con. So the idea that there has to be a safe space where Latinos can be among themselves, not to mention the nightmare, like it was pointed out to me, what'll happen when, how do you define who's a Latino or not, Because you're going to get people in the United States, you're going to have people who say they're Latino but can't speak Spanish. You're going to have people who say they're Latino but don't have Hispanic last names, right? You're going to have Latinos that are black-skinned and Latinos that are very white-skinned, right? There's the whole range, right? Like from black as coal to as white as this, And, so like in the end, is it going to be like, I guess, like being trans or whatever? If you don't have to actually pass or something. You don't have to you don't have to come in a poncho and a Mexican hat. You just have to say you're Latino and then you get in, or sorry, Latine, and then you get in. But then what's the point, right? Because at least with the segregated area for people of color, there's unlikely to be a lot of those kind of border cases. Right, but Latino isn't a skin color, right? It's definitely not a race, right? And it's not a single nationality either, right? Latino's a culture. Latino is actually something that is not constituted on any kind of a racial basis. It's actually the most multicultural thing in the world. You're Latino based on a culture, not on anything else, right? So, generally speaking, the vast majority of Latinos probably have some Hispanic blood in them, right? So like descendants of Spaniards at some point, right? But not all, right? And then there's also like people who are, descended of the slaves that Spaniards had, or descended of the Indians the Spaniards conquered, or descendants of Jews that were pretending to be Spaniards, right? Or all of that stuff, right? All of those are in there. But then there's also like, in Latin America, you have a ton of Latinos in the Southern Cone, in Argentina and Uruguay specifically, that are like almost 100% Italian, right? There's no Spaniard in them, but they're Latinos, So like there's no qualification other than actually being part of the culture. Now, a lot of people in Latin America would look at like some third generation person in Minneapolis, or person from like Portland who, her grandmother was originally Cuban or something, but she doesn't speak a word of Spanish. She doesn't actually know anything about being Latino that she hasn't watched in a movie or been taught in some really horrible university course, which means she knows nothing about being Latino, but she's going in there, hello, my fellow Latinos, right? Like that's going to go over really very badly, right? It's going to go over about as badly as when Bostonians with 200 years of ancestry in Boston go back to Ireland and start to claim that they're Irish. So it's that sort of thing. So there's a whole mess involved in that. But anyways, this is like the worst thing, because obviously it's segregation, right? Segregation is literally generally one of the worst things you can do, right? It's one step away from genocide, right? So as soon as you hit like enforce segregation, that is the worst thing that happens at Gen Con, obviously, because it's the worst thing that happens anywhere. And on that terrible note, I guess that's it for today. If you like this video, please share it anywhere people are going to watch it, or anywhere that they might get pissed off by it too. And please, if you want to support me, check out my products, stuff like Sword and Caravan, Social Encounters, my new Wilderlands book for Sword and Caravan, the Gonzo Fantasy Companion. There are going to be more new products coming out soon. And check out my RPG Pundit Presents series, which you can pick up. You can give me, if you want to give me a tip for all of my hard work here fighting the good fight, the best way to do that is to buy one of my books. If you can't afford a full book, then check out the RPG Pundit Presents series, which are short products that are range from like 99 cents to $4.99. And you're going to get something that you can really use. You're going to find something you're going to find really interesting for your game, especially if you run D&D or OSR type games. But you're also, giving me some cash. And stay tuned for there's going to be new stuff that's going to be coming out soon. And quite possibly I've been working on a deal for a whole new line of something that I'm hoping will be of interest to some of you. And keep your eyes open for all of that. But for the meantime, the links to all of my products are in the description below. Check them out. You will not be disappointed. It is like the opposite. Sword and Caravan is literally the furthest away you can be from the Radiant Citadel. It's exactly the opposite in almost every sense. It does everything right that Radiant Citadel does wrong. So check that out, right? And check out, if you want crazy fun stuff to add to your fantasy game that will give it a Gonzo weird fantasy twist, check out the Gonzo Fantasy Companion. All right. I guess that's everything for today. Currently smoking this beautiful Near Up Walnut plus Argento Roots.